There's a secret in this story, but you won't hear it until the 5th tale. There's a kiss that stops time, a room no one should enter, 12 pairs of ruined shoes, a girl lighting matches in the snow, and a silence so powerful it saves 11 lives. These aren't just fairy tales, they're dreams, and tonight we're going to walk through all of them together. But before we open the first page, tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are right now? Are you about to sleep? About to study? Or just hiding from the world a little while? And hey, tap the like button before the music fades. Subscribe now so you don't lose this when the dream ends. You can always unsubscribe later. But stories like these, they don't always come back. This is more than a bedtime video. This is a slow descent into 5 classic fairy tales, retold with warmth, sorrow, wonder, and just a little darkness true to the originals, but deep enough to carry you through the night. So, stay with me, because the last page, it changes everything. Let's begin. There is a place, quiet and unseen, where the wind brushes the hills like the soft turning of pages. You may not know you're re-nearing it until the air begins to change, becomes a little thicker with hush, and the world leans in to listen. There, at the edge of waking and sleep, just between the falling snow and the first star, sits a hearth whose flame never dies. It flickers gold and old, not roaring but breathing warmth without rush, fire without fear. Around it, time forgets itself. You won't find clocks here, or lamps that burn too bright. Only stories live in this place. Stories that drift like perfume in the smoke. Stories that press close when the wind outside whines. You settle into the worn cushions. You do not remember arriving, but it does not matter. The storyteller is already there, hooded, ageless, neither woman nor man, but something older than either. Their hands are folded on their lap. A book sits open before them, though the pages are still blank. Not for long. Shall I tell you a story? The storyteller asks, their voice like wool and ash, comfort wrapped in dusk. Not one. No, that would not do. Tonight we speak of 5 woven from wonder, laced with sorrow, stitched in dreams that remember their endings. Their fingers reach into the air, and something unseen listens. These are not new things. They were old before we named them, yet each time they are spoken, they breathe again like embers stirred, like lullabies. We begin not with war or thunder, but with dancing silent feet across forbidden stone, and secrets buried beneath silver leaves. The fire crackles once. You lean forward, the book opens, the dream begins. There once was a kingdom wrapped in mist and rules, tucked between quiet hills and clouded forests, where the sun rose late and the moon came early. In the heart of this kingdom stood a castle, tall as breath and older than silence. And in this castle lived a king not cruel, but cautious, for he had 12 daughters, each more radiant than a winter's first frost, and each more mysterious than the stars behind morning light. Their names were not spoken often beyond the castle walls, for the king feared too many ears listening. But within the walls, the sisters were like music made flesh. Leora, the eldest, walked with the steadiness of stone. Ellen next sang 2 birds with eyes that never blinked. Maren and Sylvie moved always together, like streams parting one river. Thalia, Ira, Junal, Nissa, Vale, Rowan, and little Fayin the youngest, a wisp of a girl who seemed more shadow than daughter. Every night, the king locked their doors with iron and turned the keys himself. The guards were posted, the windows sealed, and yet each morning, without fail, their shoes were worn through. Velvet worn, thin, soles torn as though they had danced the hours away. The king grew afraid. Was it witchcraft, conspiracy, or something more ancient still? He sent for tailors, who replaced the shoes, priests, who whispered blessings. He questioned his daughters gently, then sternly, then with silence. But the girls only smiled and shook their heads. "We sleep," said Leora, "and we dream. That is all." But Faen, the youngest, once whispered, "We dance," before her sisters hushed her and led her away. At last, the king declared, "Whoever can discover the secret of the princess's shoes shall have his choice among them for a bride and half my kingdom besides. But those who try and fail shall lose their life." It was a cruel risk, but the silence in the castle had begun to rot, and desperation wears sharp clothes. Suitors came, handsome, proud, cunning. All of them were given a bed in the chamber opposite the princess's door. They were to watch, to wait, to listen, and yet all failed, for each morning the shoes were ruined, and the watchers claimed they had seen nothing but dreams. And so, one by one, the suitors disappeared, until one day a soldier came to the city. He was weary, his boots scuffed by roads too long and wars too grey. He had no name worth boasting, no armor worth shining, but he had clever eyes and a calm heart. He had seen death too many times to be afraid of secrets. He heard the rumors. He went to the castle, and when the guards turned him away, he simply laughed and said, "I ask not for gold or glory. Let me try. I've danced with worse devils than silk shoes." The king, perhaps tired of loss, agreed. But an old woman stopped the soldier at the garden gate. "Do not drink what they give you," she said, her eyes rheumy with age. "Take this cloak. It will make you unseen, though not unfelt, and this twig of silver you throw it beneath you when the way seems hidden." The soldier bowed, though he did not ask her why she helped. He was not the asking sort. That night, the soldier was brought to the guarded chamber across from the princess's sealed room. He ate little, drank nothing. He watched the door, listened to the hush. He lay on the bed and let his breath fall into a rhythm like sleep. But his eyes never closed. And just before midnight, he saw it. A shimmer, a movement. The door opened. Though no key had turned, Leora peered out. Her eyes swept the chamber. She listened. "He sleeps," she whispered. As they all do, the sisters gathered. They dressed not in nightgowns, but in gowns of moonlight and frost-colored thread. Jewels glittered in their hair like captured stars. And Fane laughed, a soft sound like wind in grass. "Shall we go?" They did not walk. They glided. A hidden panel behind one bed swung open. The soldier rose silently, pulled the old woman's cloak about his shoulders, and followed them. Downward they went, past stone walls, past staircases that spiraled like vines into the earth. Down, down, until the air grew cooler and the silence heavier. And still the sisters descended, their feet never faltering. The soldier followed, unseen, and then light. Not firelight, not torch or candle, but a forest of silver trees, their leaves glowing with soft luminescence, lighting the path with dreamlight. The soldier reached for a branch. It came off soundlessly in his hand. He tucked it into his cloak. The princesses passed through the forest, and beyond it came to a lake of black glass. On its shore waited 12 boats, each rowed by a prince, as pale as fog and silent as stone. The sisters stepped in, one by one. Leora with her prince, Faen with hers. The boats slid across the water, toward a palace of crystal and song on the other side, music spilling from its towers like light from a star. The soldier slipped into Fen's boat just before it pushed off. She frowned. "It feels heavier tonight," she murmured. But her prince said nothing. The water did not reflect the stars. It reflected something deeper, and the palace grew. Inside, the music was endless. Waltzes and reels, lilts and stomps. The sisters danced, and their shoes sang the rhythm of some forgotten tongue. The princes were tireless, the floors vast, the lights endless. Crystal chandeliers spun above them like court galaxies. The soldier watched. He did not understand all of it, but he understood enough. This was no enchantment of madness, it was desire, longing, a hidden life unearthed each night. The girls were not prisoners here. They were queens of a world beneath silence, and yet they came willingly back each dawn to the locked door. The waiting father, the question never answered. The soldier took more Kanza cup of golden wine left on the balustrade, a petal from a black rose plucked from the prince's sleeve. And when the last dance waned, and the first hint of dawn kissed the lake, he slipped again into Fen's boat. She did not speak, but her eyes moved, as if seeking something that did not belong. When they reached the shore, the princesses retraced their steps. Up, up, through the staircase that twisted like a memory, through the panel, into their chamber. The soldier returned to his bed, breathing slow. And when the king came that morning and asked as he had asked a dozen times before, the soldier opened his hand and said, "Your Majesty, I know where they go." The throne room was quiet, save for the murmuring of guards and the restless creak of tapestries in the morning wind. The king sat slouched in his heavy seat, wearied by too many mornings like this one, too many pairs of ruined shoes lined like ghosts before him. But this morning was different. The soldier did not tremble. He did not bow deeply or speak in riddles. Instead, he drew from his coat a branch of silver still glowing faintly with the breath of that other-world forest. He laid it gently on the floor between them. Then a goblet, etched with symbols none could read, its rim still glistening with golden wine. And finally, a petal blacker than pitch, curled slightly as though from a rose that had listened too long. The king did not speak, but his eyes narrowed. The soldier said, "Softly they dance, far below the castle, where trees have no roots and water holds no sky. Each night they descend through a hidden stair. Each dawn they return with shoes undone and eyes that have seen more than this world allows." The princesses stood nearby cloaked in silence. Leora, proud as marble, lifted her chin. "You watched us." The soldier nodded. "You spied I did." Fayen stepped forward. Her voice was barely more than a breeze. "Then you must die." That was the law. The king looked from daughter to soldier, his hands shaking slightly. "He has discovered your secret. He may choose one of you, and my kingdom is promised." Leora stepped back. The other sisters turned their eyes downward, but Fayen stood still. The soldier looked at her not with hunger, not with ambition, but with something like understanding. "I choose none," he said at last. "Not as bride, not for crown. I only wished to know the truth." A ripple of something passed through the room, too quiet to be called relief, too strange to be joy. Fayen lowered her gaze. "Then you are wiser than all before." The king frowned. "You would deny my reward." "I would not trap a dancer," the soldier said, and he meant it. The old laws were satisfied. The soldier, unnamed and unclaimed, was given a place near the forest edge and left to live quietly. The king forbade the stairs to be used again, ordered the chamber sealed and the door bricked shut. But secrets, once unearthed, do not bury easily. It was some nights later when Fayen came to him. She wore no crown. Her slippers were whole, but her eyes were full of ash and memory. "You did not bind me," she said, kneeling by his hearth. "I never meant to," the soldier replied. She looked at him. "We danced not for mischief, nor for love. We danced because the world above was too loud, too brittle. Down there, the music understands. I know, but now it is gone. Silence stretched between them, not empty, but full like the hush before snow, like the hush after grief. He looked into the fire. Not gone, he said, only waiting. She smiled then, soft and small, and though she did not dance that night, her fingers curled into the air as if feeling for a rhythm only she could hear. Back in the castle, the sisters grew quieter. They no longer gathered in the dark, no longer wore silver combs or midnight thread. Some married, others went to convents. One took to walking alone beside the still lake, but Fane often wandered to the forest's edge. And sometimes, in the hush of evening, music could still be heard, not loud, but certain, like a memory trying to breathe. And the soldier, he lived simply, never sought another war, never told the tale again. But each spring, he found silver leaves in the grass outside his door, and he would smile, knowing dreams, once walked, are never truly lost. Seasons shifted like sighs, and the castle slowly changed with them. The king, once sharp with suspicion, grew quiet. He no longer asked where his daughters went, no longer inspected their shoes. He had what he wanted: order, answers, an end. But beneath the stillness lay uneases. If something beautiful had been extinguished before it could finish its final song, the ballroom was cleaned but never used. The music rooms stood untouched, harps gathering dust, violins even the wind through the high halls seemed to search for something that no longer echoed. And the princesses, they changed too. Leora married a northern prince with sharp eyes and no music in his heart. Her voice grew careful, and her smiles polite. Ellen fled to the coast, where she kept a small bird sanctuary and never sang again. Maren and Sylvie remained close, but they no longer danced in corridors or laughed in rhythm. Their joy had dimmed, folded inward like pressed petals. One by one, the sisters faded from their old selves, until only Farin seemed unchanged. But even she had grown quieter, her laughter thinner, her footsteps lighter, as though unsure if she truly walked on earth or only above it. In his cottage near the edge of the kingdom, the soldier dreamed often of silver trees, of black waters, of shoes whispering against crystalline floors, and chandeliers that hummed like stars, and sometimes a dancing, laughing, spinning beyond his reach. He never sought her out. He did not need to. She came when the wind turned west. She brought with her silence and memories, and they sat often without words. On one such evening, she arrived soaked in soft rain, her cloak dotted with early leaves. She did not speak at first, only laid her head upon his shoulder and closed her eyes. "I dreamed of it again," she whispered. "So did I. I miss it. So do I." They sat like that until the fire dimmed, and then Fayen said, "Do you remember the silver trees?" "Yes, there's a path," she said slowly, "that isn't made of stone or root. A path made only when you walk it." He turned toward her. Her eyes held something new, something deeper. "I know," he said. The days passed quietly, but something stirred beneath them. Fane walked more often, sometimes barefoot, her eyes scanning the earth as though searching for a rhythm. The soldier noticed, too. The forest had changed. Its breath had grown heavier. The trees leaned in closer, whispering with more urgency. One night, when the moon was neither full nor new, they stood together at the old garden gate, the one where he had first met the crone with the silver branch. Faine held something in her hand, a slipper, untouched, unworn, but humming with promise. "We broke the spell," she said, "but we never buried the story. Do you want to?" She shook her head. "I want to dance again." not in secret, not in shame, and he offered his hand. They walked not down, but inward, toward a place the castle had forgotten. A hill swallowed by moss, a doorway once sealed with stone, now loosened by time. They entered. No staircase greeted them, no panel or portal, but the darkness held breath, and in the hush, the silver trees bloomed again, not before them, but around them, like a dream reborn. Fain did not gasp. She stepped forward, lifted her slipper, and began to move. The music came not from strings or flutes, but from the very earth, from memory and rhythm, from longing and return. And the soldier followed her, his steps unsure at first, but soon steady, then sure, then soaring. They danced, and somewhere far above them, the wind through the castle halls laughed for the first time in years. In time, stories rose again. Children whispered of a man and a girl who walked into a forgotten hill and never came back, but left behind slipper-shaped prints into. Others said the forest had its own rhythm now, and if you stepped just right, you could hear music in the trees. The king died old and silent. The castle passed into other hands. The ballroom was used again, though no one ever danced as well. But on quiet nights, if you sat by the hearth with eyes half closed, you might hear it. The soft beat of feet on glass, the faint brush of silk on stone, and if you listened closer still, a voice light as dusk, warm as memory. Some dreams must end, but others, they only wait. The storyteller leans back from the page, their fingers curled around the edges of memory. The fire has softened, no longer dancing brightly, but glowing like coals tucked beneath a winter blanket. A hush settles in the room. Outside, the wind nudges gently at the shutters, as though curious to hear what came next. "Do you see?" the storyteller murmurs, "how even joy can wear a hole in the world?" Their voice is quiet, not sad, but reverent, as one might speak of something long buried and dearly missed. They danced to escape. You know, not from cruelty, but from the cold kind of silence that grows between expectations. They found a world beneath the rules, one stitched from silver and song, where their voices moved faster than their father's laws. But even dreams, if held too tightly, begin to wither. A log shifts in the hearth. Sparks whisper upward. They did not lose everything, the storyteller continues. Only the shape of the secret. The rhythm found another path. As it always does, they glanced down, not at the book, but at the shoes beneath their chair, worn and soft with use. Their toe taps, once, twice, then stills. You may be wondering, childdew or tailies shimmer with twilight and choice. They look up, eyes reflecting firelight. Not all. Some glow cold, some demand more than we are ready to give. And some ask us to keep silent through every thorn and trial, until love is proven and wounds become wings. They reach out, brush their hand gently over the book's open page. Let us speak now of nettles, of swans that once were brothers, of a girl who wove her voice into thread until it bled her fingers raw. The wind presses closer, the fire grows still, and the next dream begins to form. There was once a kingdom ringed by cliffs and mist, where the sky always felt like it had just exhaled a storm. The sea below was restless and wild, and the forests above whispered old names in winds that never stopped moving. In this kingdom lived a king, strong and just, and his children 12, in all 11 sons, bold and radiant as dawn, each with hair like golden straw and voices like the first bird of morning, and one daughter, the youngest, named Elisa, who was born as soft as starlight and as quiet as the roots beneath the hills. She was her mother's child, in every way graceful, gentle and truant, the queen, before her passing, had wrapped her last breath around Alyssa's name like a blessing. For a time, they lived in harmony. The boys studied in the great halls, learning sword and verse, climbing trees faster than the wind, leaping from cliffs into waves with no fear in their bones. And Elisa, she followed them like a shadow full of sunlight, too young to keep up, but never far behind. Her laughter stitched the brothers together, her stories strange and soft, and always half-dreamed wove into their days like thread through cloth. But time, as it does, turned its face, and the queen died. And the king, who was not yet old, grew lonely. He took another wife, a woman with black eyes and long, perfect hands. No one knew where she came from, only that she smiled too easily and never blinked when the lightning struck. At first, she spoke kindly to the children, but kindness that grows quickly often wilts faster. Soon, the brothers were sent away one by one, ostensibly for education, but in truth, banished from the palace grounds. They were to live in a distant forest, surrounded by cold tutors and stone walls. Elisa, still only 7, was spared but watched her brothers leave in a line of horses and tears, their faces brave, their hands clenched tight. The new queen did not strike, she did not shout, she simply began to erase. Elisa's toys disappeared, her books vanished, her warm wool gowns were replaced with scratchy grey cloth. Her voice, once greeted with smiles, now received only silence. Soon she was confined to the farthest tower, and when she turned 11, the queen summoned her. "You are of no use to me," the queen said, her voice like glass. "Pretty things must be either ornamental or invisible." She drew forth a vial of black liquid and dripped it into a bowl of milk. "Drink," she commanded. Elisa did not, so the queen seized her, forced the milk to her lips, and the world unraveled. Elisa was not turned to stone or beast, but her beauty, her voice, her presence, everything that had been light vanished. Her skin grew rough, her eyes dim, her golden hair turned to tangle and ash. She was not cursed with death or transformation. She was cursed with forgetting. The castle staff no longer recognized her. They believed her a servant girl, a child from the woods. Her name meant nothing. She was cast out, wandered for days through forest and mud, crying with a voice no one heard, until at last, beneath the wide grey sky, at the edge of a ruined chapel wrapped in ivy, she fell into sleep. But dreams are strange things, and in her sleep, Eliza saw her mother, not clearly but enough. A soft hand brushed her forehead. "Go to the forest," the queen whispered. "Go where the river meets the root. There, truth remembers, and brothers return." Elisa woke with dew on her lashes and a direction in her bones. She rose, shaking, and walked barefoot, hungry, heart full of cinders, into the dark green world. The forest did not reject her. It wrapped her in the hush of moss and birdsong, led her gently where the earth hummed with old memory. For 3 days she walked, ate berries, drank from streams, slept on leaves, and wove her dreams into prayer. And on the 3rd day, near twilight, she came to a clearing, and there sudden and sure stood 11 swans, large, white, glowing faintly in the dusk. They looked at her, still as stone, and then each one leapt into the air. But before the last took flight, the feathers shivered, and where wings had been, there were arms. Where a beak, a voice. "Eliza," the boy asked, his voice breaking. She gasped. "Edward," she whispered, her eldest brother. But even as she reached for him, the sun vanished behind the trees, and in a shimmer of feathers, he was gone again. That night, Eliza slept at the edge of the clearing, curled against the roots of a willow tree. Above her, The stars blinked like held breath. She did not dream naught of castles, or milk, or her mother's voice. She only remembered feathers and eyes, the color of morning. And when the dawn came, with its golden light spilling over the horizon, the swans returned. As the sunlight kissed their wings, they shimmered, and one by one, they became her brothers again. Tall, fair, strange with time and wilderness, but unmistakably them. They ran to her, held her. Some wept, others laughed in disbelief. "Is it really you?" asked Edward, brushing leaves from her hair. "I thought you had vanished forever," whispered Lucas, the third eldest. "How are you even still alive?" breathed Ilias, who had once built her toy boats and carved stars into her ceiling beams. They crowded around her like wind and warmth. It was not until the joy quieted that the questions began. She told them everything. Of the queen, of the curse, of the forgetting. Her voice trembled, but her words never faltered. And when she finished, the brothers exchanged glances. "We, too, were cursed," Edward said. "But in a different way. Each day," Elias added, "we wear the shape of swans. Only when the sun sets can we become ourselves again. If we do not return to this clearing by daybreak, we remain birds until the next sunset." "We have wandered," Lucas said, "searching for you, searching for an end. And now, here she was." The days that followed were a kind of peace Eliza had forgotten. Each morning, the brothers flew into the sky, their white wings drawing arcs through clouds and sunrise. And each night, they returned. The clearing became a place of stories and firelight, laughter in low voices, food found in the forest, and memories stitched back together with gentle hands. But it could not last forever. "We cannot live like this always," Edward said one dusk. "And you should not suffer in the woods." Elisa shook her head. "This suffering is nothing. I would live here forever if it meant we were together." Still, the brothers spoke of searching again, some hint of a healer, a spell breaker. That night, as the brothers slept, Eliza crept to the stream nearby. Her reflection flickered in the water bare, dirt-streaked, but something in her eyes had changed. Resolve. Flame. She knelt, whispered into the water. "What must I do to free them?" And the forest answered, not in words but in the hush of wind, in the sudden bloom of a plant with nettle-green leaves and silver veins. She reached for it. The moment her fingers closed around the stem, fire lanced through her palms. She gasped. The leaves stung like burning needles. Her skin blistered instantly. But the message was clear. From the forest's stillness, she understood. To break the curse, she must weave 11 shirts from nettles. Only then, at the final thread, would her brothers be free. But there was more. She must not speak. Not one word. Not one cry. Not even a whisper until the last shirt is done. No scream, no defense, no prayer, silence. If she broke the vow, even once, all would be lost. She returned to the clearing at dawn. Her brothers were already shifting feathers, replacing limbs, beaks, replacing words. She wanted to tell them, wanted to explain, but she only smiled, kissed Eduard's cheek, and waved them off into the sky. Then she gathered her hands around the stalk of another nettle. She did not flinch. Her days became pain. The nettles had to be plucked at night, when the moon was sharp and silver and the leaves held the right sting. She wore gloves, at first, made of thick bark and moss, but they slowed her. And so, she let them go. Her palms grew raw, her fingers blistered. The threads burned into her skin like whispered fire. But she wove. Each stitch a prayer, each thread a name. She did not cry, not for hunger, not for cold, not even when her hands bled into the fabric. And at night, she smiled at her brothers. They did not know. They only saw her eyes brighter now. and quieter, and believed she was healing. But even in the deepest forest, the world finds you. One morning, while gathering water from the river, Eliza was seen, a hunting partyman in red and gold, on horses with silver bridles. They circled her quickly. She dropped her basket, backed away. She could not speak, she could not plead, and so they saw only what they wished to see, a wild girl. Filthy, mute, strange. They brought her before their prince. He was young, perhaps 20. His face was kind, but curious. His eyes carried the weight of someone raised in stone halls, fed on order and suspicion. He looked at her hands wrapped in leaves, bleeding beneath. He looked at the bundle of shirts, half-stitched, in her satchel, and he said softly, "Who are you?" She did not answer. He frowned. "Are you cursed?" No reply, yet something in her gaze stilled him. "She cannot be left here," one of his men said. "She'll die alone." But the prince, watching her, saw something different. Not fear, not madness, purpose. And so he made a decision. Elisa was taken to the palace by the sea, not the one of her father, long lost, but another kingdom, filled with salt-wined towers and long, echoing halls. She was given a room with windows facing the cliffs. Her hands were tended, but still she said nothing. She wove each night, hiding the nettles under her bed, sewing in secret by candlelight, and as the days passed, the prince grew more curious. He watched her from doorways, spoke to her gently, though she never replied. He brought her books, flowers, gloves, to soothe her ruined hands, and though she could not thank him, her eyes softened. She smiled, once, and that he carried like treasure, but not everyone welcomed her. Whispers began of a forest witch, of an enchantress with thorns in her hands and silence in her heart. She dreams spells, they said. She walks without speaking. Surely she's cursed. The prince did not listen, but the court did, and shadows began to gather. Elisa did not know how long she had been in the prince's palace, only that the seasons had changed. Summer gave way to winds with teeth, and the gulls cried louder over the cliffs. Still, each evening she sat by her small window and worked in secret, pricking her blistered fingers on the nettle thread, her face calm, her lips closed. Though she never spoke, she had become a presence the palace could not ignore. Servants came to her chamber and left quickly, uncertain of the girl who did not nod, who did not gesture, who only stared with soft, distant eyes and hands that worked like they were trying to remember something the world had forgotten. The prince, whose name was Aurelian, watched her more often now, at first from doorways, then from arm's length, and then beside her in the evenings, when the wind howled and her fire ran low. He asked her questions she could not answer, where she came from, why she never spoke, who she had lost. Elisa only looked at him, her eyes wide and steady. There was kindness in his face, but also something deeper longing, perhaps, or the ache of a man who had lived his life in measured expectations and now stood on the edge of something he could not explain. He began bringing her nettles from the hills himself. He did not know what they were for, but he saw how she held them, how she folded them into her skirts and breathed, as though they were air itself. He never asked. Autumn settled. Elisa had nearly finished the 7th shirt. Her hands ached, bones stiff with cold. At night, she dreamed of her brothers standing on the edge of the sea, wings stretched wide, watching the horizon with patient sorrow. Their time was running short. She could feel it in her ribs. But word had begun to spread. A young noblewoman, Javara, jealous and sharp-eyed, seen the nettles under Elissa's bed, had watched the silent girl gather them, even in the dark, and had whispered to others that nettles were used in curses, in bindings, in "She's a witch," Javara told the court, lips thin with satisfaction. She's casting something dark, and she has the prince under her spell. Old rumors grew quickly. A woman without speech. A girl who never ate with others. Who bled into thread. Who walked at moonrise alone. Aurelian defended her, but unease took root even in his voice. He had grown to love her not in the fevered way of stories, but with slow, sure wonder. He could not understand what she carried. He only knew he wanted to carry it beside her. Then, one bitter morning, Eliza was discovered outside the chapel with her arms full of fresh-cut nettles. A priest found her, crying out at the welts across her skin, the burns on her fingers, the thorns embedded in her palms. She could not explain, she could not cry out. She was brought before the court in silence, nettle leaves falling from her skirts like green ash. The room was heavy with eyes and silence. Aurelian stood at the front, stunned. She gathers cursed plants, Javara proclaimed, stepping forward. She will not speak. She will not write. She casts her spells in thread. The high priest, an old man with eyes like cold iron, declared it heresy. She is possessed, he said, and by the old laws, she must be tried. Aurelian tried to intervene, but the council had already turned. The people whispered of drought, of dead crops, of crows over the well. It was enough. She must be burned, the high priest declared. At the winter's end, let her repent in silence and be judged by flame. Aurelian collapsed against the pillar. His hands trembled. He looked to Eliza, who stood barefoot, blood on her arms, but her gaze unwavering. He stepped forward and whispered, "Please, say something. I will save you." Elisa looked up at him. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. She reached out, brushed his hand once, and in her eyes he saw the shape of her love. And she said nothing. She was imprisoned in a small stone cell with a single narrow window facing the sea. Her hands were wrapped in linen. Her needles and thread were taken, but she gathered nettles from the cracks in the walls. Still she wove, slowly, bleeding anew. Each night, the wind carried the sound of distant but steady, and she pressed her cheek to the window to listen. Sometimes, in the dream between sleep and waking, she thought she saw them 11 great white birds circling the cliff's edge, searching, calling without sound. She had 8 shirts completed now. The 9th was nearly done. She worked by moonlight, her movements tight and frantic, her breath caught in her chest like fire. Her skin had become rough with old scars, but she did not care. Pain was a language now, and love was silent labor. Winter crept into her bones. Her hair grew long and wild. Her hands were almost useless, but still she moved them, thread by thread, stitch by stitch, and when she reached the final leaf of the 10th shirt, her fingers trembling, her tears falling into the weave, the snow began to fall outside the prison walls. Only 1 shirt remained, and one day, the sky on the morning of Elisa's execution was white with frost. Thin snow drifted across the cliffs like torn silk, and the wind had fallen into a hush too deep for but. In the village square below the palace, the people gathered slowly, wrapped in heavy cloaks, faces drawn and uncertain. A scaffold had been built of pale pine, and at its center rose the stake tall, cruel, bound in ropes and bundles of greenwood. Flames would take slower on fresh wood. The priest had said it was just. Elisa was brought forth with bare feet and a crown of nettles in her lap. Her face, though pale, showed no fear, only exhaustion and a quiet determination that flickered like coals behind her eyes. Her hands were wrapped, but inside the folds of her tattered gown lay the final shirt, still incomplete. The sleeves were missing. She had no more nettles left. From his place, at the edge of the crowd, Prince Aurelian watched with a grief so sharp it bent his spine. His pleas had been rejected. His power stripped by fear and tradition. He had tried to free her, and she had only looked at him and shaken her head, as if to say, "Not yet, not yet." The priest stood before the crowd, his voice echoing across the stones. "This girl has refused to speak in her defense. Her silence is an admission. Her hands bear the signs of witchcraft. She has labored in darkness and blood. Let the fire purify what the tongue has not confessed." But as the torch was lit, the sky changed. A sound broke the air, not from lips, but from wings. 11 shadows fell across the crowd as if heaven itself had cracked open. The people turned their eyes upward and saw them 11 great swans, descending from the clouds in a spiral of white and gold. Their wings cut the sky like thunder-made silk. They cried out, sharp and shrill, and the wind seemed to answer. They landed in a ring around the scaffold. The priest fell back in horror. Guards raised their weapons, but the swans did not move. Elisa stood perfectly still. She reached into her gown with shaking hands, pulling forth the 11 shirts, now bloodied, tattered, and whole. "She'll cast each one by one, over the swans." And as the final shirton finished was thrown, the sun broke through the clouds. Where feathers had been, now stood men, her brothers, noble and radiant, taller than any prince, with the look of kings and sorrow in their bones. Only the youngest, Cale, had a single swan wing where his left arm should have been. The shirt had lacked sleeves, but he smiled through tears. Elisa turned to the crowd, her face streaked with soot, her voice rising for the first time in over a year. "They are my brothers," she said, "cursed not by me, but by wickedness I was forbidden to name. I loved them in silence, I labored in pain, and I would have died gladly if it meant they were free." The silence that followed was absolute. The high priest fell to his knees. Javara fainted, and Aurelian, barely able to breathe, stepped forward, tears shining in his eyes. "Elisa," he whispered, but she was already falling. The effort, the cold, the thread, the endless burning had taken its toll. She crumpled to the ground as though her bones had forgotten how to hold her. Cale caught her with his one good arm. Edward bent to her ear. "Elisa," he said, voice breaking. "You did it! You freed us!" Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time she smiled, not the tired smile of burden, but the pure smile of completion. "I knew I would," she whispered, and then her head rested against his shoulder, and she slept not with death, but with peace. Elisa recovered slowly. The burns on her hands never fully healed. Her fingers would never be quick again, and her voice remained soft, a sound used sparingly, like a bell only rung for truth. Aurelian visited her every day. He asked nothing. He only brought flowers, books, quiet stories. When at last she could walk, he offered her his arm. She took it, not with ceremony, but with ease. In time, they were married, not with trumpets or grand processions, but in a small stone chapel beside the sea. Her brothers stood beside her. Cale, still marked by the wing he bore, wept openly. Elisa never spoke of the nettles again, nor of the fire. But each year, when spring came, she would go to the edge of the forest and plant a single white blossom in the soil where the curse had begun, and when her children asked her why, she would only say, "Because even silence has roots." The wind returned to the cliffs. The swans did not, but sometimes, on the quietest nights, the sky shimmered like feathers in flight, and the sea, restless and watchful, carried their names into the stars. The storyteller closes the book softly, as if the tale itself were sleeping. The firelight flickers low, casting long shadows along the floorboards. Outside, a sighing wind stirs, and the room settles into that tender space between silence and memory. The storyteller leans forward, elbows resting on their knees, gaze distant but still burning softly with thought. So much pain, they murmur. So many wounds born in silence. Their fingers trace invisible lines in the air. She spoke no words, but every stitch was a sentence, every blister a chapter. Not all spells are cast with magic, some are cast with love, with devotion so pure, it makes even silence holy. The storyteller breathes in deeply, then lets the breath go slowly, like a prayer folding itself into the walls. She bled without demand, waited without reward, and still she was doubted. Still she was bound and judged. That is the way of the world. Sometimes even the brightest souls must walk through fire before anyone remembers to call them sacred. The storyteller lifts their gaze. Ah, but real love is never lost. It finds you, even when you are cold and voiceless and ashen. It waits on the wind, it circles the scaffold, and sometimes it wears feathers. The fire gives a soft crackle, and a long silence follows. Then the storyteller shifts. Now, they say, voice lower, steadier, I must warn you. The next tale is colder still. It has no feathers, no forest. It walks behind locked doors, in the hush of stone corridors. There are no witches, but there are monsters. The kind that smile with teeth to white, the kind who offer keys and demand silence of a different sort. Their hand opens slowly, palm upward, and yet, ... we must go. For this tale, too, lives in the dreaming half, and not all dreams are soft. The fire dims, a key turns in a lock, somewhere far away, and the next story begins. There once lived a man in a grand house at the edge of the world. It stood alone on the cliffside, weather-beaten and noble, its windows tall as spires, its halls deeper than silence. The sea roared far below, but the house never trembled. The man who owned it was known by a strange name, Bluebeard. No one remembered his real one. Perhaps he had buried it with his youth. He was not unkind, and he was not cruel, at least not to those who knew him in passing. He was simply unsettling. For one thing, there was his appearance. His beard was thick and dark blue, not the blue of sky or ocean, but a bruised midnight color, unnatural and gleaming. His eyes were the same, and though they were intelligent, they were cold. The kind of cold that watched rather than felt. He was wealthy beyond measure. His ships brought spices and silk from distant shores. His grounds bloomed with rare flowers. His halls glittered with mirrors and chandeliers, velvet walls and carved oak. Servants moved soundlessly through corridors, and yet he lived alone, not without effort. Bluebeard had been married many times, but each wife had vanished. No one saw them leave. No funerals were held, no letters returned. Whispers spread like roots. Some said they had run from him. Others said he had sent them away in secret disgrace. And others, still quieter, believed he had buried them in the cellar. When asked, he only smiled and said, "Marriage is a delicate business. Not every heart is meant to stay." In the village nearby, a widow lived with her 2 daughters. They were not noble, nor poor, just clever enough to dream, and proud enough to keep their hunger quiet. The elder daughter was beautiful in the polished way of mirrors and fine fabric. The younger, Yvain, was quieter, watchful, clever, and too often mistaken for plain because she did not speak often. Bluebeard visited their home. He came not with ceremony, but with wine and gifts, stories from the East, and a charm that was smooth and practiced. He laughed with the widow, admired the elder girl's singing, and told Yvain she had the eyes of someone who read more than she should. In time, he offered a proposal. "I seek a wife, and I see 2 treasures in this home. But I will take only one." He said it with a smile. But even smiles can cast shadows. The elder daughter, flattered and pleased, looked to her mother. The widow hesitated. There was something about Bluebeard's gaze, something too steady. But the younger daughter, Yvain, said softly, "Let my sister go." And so she did. Preparations were made. A fine wedding, a quiet feast, and the elder daughter, bright and sweet, was led away to Bluebeard's estate. Weeks passed, then months. A letter came thin and strange. "She is well," it read. "She is ... learning," then nothing more. Bluebeard returned again, this time alone. His smile had not changed, but his voice had a weight to it now. "I find myself unmarried once more," he said, as though speaking of a broken vase. "But I remain hopeful. Perhaps the treasure I missed the first time was the one I truly needed." Yvain said nothing. Her mother wept softly. Still, the marriage was arranged. This time, more subdued. No feast, no guests, just a carriage, a veil, and a silence that grew louder with every mile to the house on the cliff. Yvain entered Bluebeard's home with her head high. The halls were colder than she'd imagined. There were tapestries of hunting scenes, portraits of women with eyes turned away, and chandeliers that dripped glass like frozen tears. Her chambers were grand, but windowless, her meals served in silence. Bluebeard was a generous husband. He gave her jewels, books, silks from the Orient, a harp carved with lions. He spoke softly to her, and listened, and praised her mind. But there was something beneath his gentleness, something watchful, caged. She often found herself staring at the closed doors in the corridor. There were many. Some opened to salons and libraries, rooms filled with light and color, but one remained locked. Always. It had no nameplate, no handle, just a keyhole and a strip of iron so old it had rusted the frame. One morning, Bluebeard stood in the doorway of her chambers. "I must leave for a week," he said. "A business matter. While I am gone, the house is yours." He placed a ring of keys into her pammage, one intricate, old derweight pulling at her hand like gravity. "This one," he said, pointing to a small, blackened key, "opens the door at the end of the hall." His eyes did not blink. "You may enter any room you like. Explore, discover. All is yours. But not that one." Yvain met his gaze. "What is behind it?" "Only what should be left alone." And he kissed her hand and was gone before dusk. For 2 days, Yvain wandered the house. She opened salons with faded wallpaper and music boxes that still played. She explored rooms filled with telescopes and strange maps. She found a library stacked with volumes older than countries, and a greenhouse where glass roses bloomed in spirals. But always, her steps led her back to the locked door. She tried to ignore it. She played the harp. She wrote poems. She memorized the names of the birds in the stained glass. Still, the key remained warm in her pocket, and on the 3rd night, when the wind howled loud enough to swallow doubt, she crept down the corridor barefoot, heart pounding like a drum in a funeral march. She knelt, placed the key into the lock, and turned it. The door opened with a long, sighing creak, as though it had been holding its breath for years. Cold air poured out. Sharp and metallic. Yvain stepped inside. The room was small and dim. No windows, no tapestries. Stone walls wept moisture, and the floor sloped slightly downward. The light from her taper danced along the edges of something strange. At first, she saw nothing but old velvet and wood. Then her eyes adjusted. They were there. Women, not living. 7 of them, dressed in what had once been fine gowns, now faded to ash and rot. Some were slumped in chairs, others arranged as though for tea. One lay across a chaise, her throat a line of dried rust. Their faces were pale and waxen, mouths slightly open, as if caught eyes wide, clouded, and their hands each one bore a wedding ring. Some still bled. The walls bore no marks of struggle, no scratchings, no cries preserved in paint, only silence, the silence of secrets turned solid. Yvain staggered back, her breath caught in her throat, a soundless scream pressing against her ribs. She dropped the candle. Darkness swallowed the room. The door still opened, waited behind her. She turned and fled. In the hallway, she ran blindly, the key still clutched in her palm, her skirts catching on the corners of the stone. She reached her chambers, slammed the door shut, and leaned against it, gasping, her skin slick with sweat. She looked down. The key, its silver handle, was now stained, red thick, dark, and impossibly fresh. She tried to wipe it clean, rubbing it with her sleeve, then with water, then soap and oils. Nothing worked. The blood would not lift. The stain only spread a curse, a warning. The key had told the truth, and it refused to forget. Bluebeard returned at dawn 2 days later. His boots left streaks of sea wet on the marble, and his coat smelled of salt and storm. He embraced Yvain gently, asked if the days had passed quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. He smiled and asked for the keys. She handed him the ring, except for one. That one she had hidden beneath a loose stone in the hearth, in a small cloth wrapped tight. She hoped he would not notice, but he did. He always noticed. He turned the key ring over in his hand. "There is one missing," he said. Her blood ran cold. "I must have misplaced it," she whispered, though her voice shook. "I didn't open the door." His smile was faint, almost kind. "Yvain, my dear, your voice was made for truth. Don't waste it on lies." He stood. "Bring me the key." Yvain ran, not far, just to the stairwell, but Bluebeard followed her with slow, certain steps. She retrieved the cloth-wrapped key. When she turned, he was there, watching. She handed it over. He peeled back the cloth. The blood was dry now, but unmistakable. His face changed, not to rage, not yet, but to disappointment, like a man who had known he would be betrayed, and now found no satisfaction in being right. "I warned you," he said quietly, "not because I wished to frighten you, but because I wanted to see if you could obey." She swallowed. "Those women, your wives, they were curious," he said. "They could not resist what was not theirs. They took what was sacred and made it small." "They died," she whispered. "No," Bluebeard said. "They were taken. There is a difference." She backed away. He stepped forward. "The moment you opened that door, your fate was sealed. I will give you time to pray. But at dusk, you will join them." Yvain was locked in her chamber. The door bolted from outside. She was given water, nothing else. No pen, no candle, just silence. But she had not survived by silence alone. She tore strips from her gown and braided them into rope. She pulled nails from the floorboards and wedged them into the lock. She waited until the guard grew tired, until his footsteps slowed, and then she climbed out the window, lowering herself along the rope until her feet touched the outer ledge. She ran barefoot along the sea wall, wind tearing at her hair, salt stinging her eyes. At the edge of the cliff stood the old tower, the one she had never entered, the one with no door. But she saw it now hidden behind ivy, a narrow passage. Inside, the stairs spiraled down into blackness. But she knew by the pull in her bones that the truth waited there. She descended. The room at the tower's base was small, circular, bare, and on a table at its center sat a book. She opened it, pages upon pages, names, dates, portraits. Eleanor wept too much. Morel tried to run. Tessia betrayed. Alana asked questions, each name written in perfect script, each followed by a verdict, and at the very end, a new page. Her name, Yvain Love, but failed. Tears slid down her cheeks. She tore the page out, and the room groaned. Stone began to tremble. Dust fell from the beams. She fled the tower. Behind her, the cliff began to crack. The sea rose. The house its foundations, and at its center, Bluebeard stood in the grand hall, calm as ever. "You ran," he said. Like the others, she stood in the doorway, wild-haired, bleeding at the ankles, dress torn. "I'm not like them," he asked, stepping forward. "Then finish what you began." He handed her the key. The key felt heavier in her hand, as if it remembered everything the women before her, the blood it had soaked in, the silence it had locked behind rusted doors. Bluebeard's face was unreadable. "Use it," he said. "Finish the circle. Join them." You opened the door. The price is yours to pay. Yvain stared at him. His posture was calm, his hands open, not threatening, not violent. But beneath that calm was a storm. She could see it now. All of him was a performance, wrapped in satin and shadow. A man who believed himself, just because he had always gone unchallenged. "I won't," she said, and her voice rang out clear and sure. His expression cracked. "Then you will die a coward." "No," Yvain said, stepping back, the key clenched in her fist. "I will die as myself." Behind her, the doors to the hall opened, not by her hand, but by fate's. Two figures entered, her brothers. She had sent a message before Bluebeard had returned, a letter hidden in the pages of a book, given to a merchant bound for her home village. She hadn't known if it would reach them, but here they were, tall, silent, steady, and armed. Bluebeard drew no weapon. He only watched them with something like disappointment. "You sent for them," he said. "I had hoped you would face this alone." "She did," said her eldest brother, voice sharp as steel. "But now she doesn't have to." Bluebeard did not fight. Not truly. His blade flashed once, then fell. The brothers overpowered him. Easily his strength was in secrets, not combat. When he collapsed to his knees, he looked up at Yvain, breathing heavy. "Even now," he said, "you do not understand. They loved me, every one of them." "They feared you," she replied. "And fear is not love." His eyes, those cold, midnight eyes, finally broke. He reached for her hand once more. She turned away. Bluebeard was buried with no name, no ceremony, beneath the cliffs he had once ruled. The house was emptied, the locks destroyed, the tower burned, and the women, those long-lost wives, were given rest. Their families were still alive, were found. Graves were marked, names remembered. Yvain inherited the estate. She did not keep it. She opened its gates, gave its lands to the people, turned the halls into gardens and quiet places. She kept the key, though not as a weapon, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. In time, she married, not quickly, not with fairy tale urgency, but slowly, to someone kind, someone who asked questions and listened to answers, a man who never held a secret behind his smile. She lived quietly, never rich, never loud, but always awake, always listening. And whenever someone offered her something she did not ask for, be it a locked door or a price she did not choose, she would hold that old iron key in her palm and remember, some love is poison, some silence is survival, and some doors must never be opened unless you're ready to walk all the way through. The storyteller sits in stillness, the fire casting low amber light across their knees. The book rests closed on their lap, one hand covering its spine. the other gently trailing the edge of the chair's armrest as though feeling for something hidden just beyond the wood. That was not a kind story, they say at last, voice no louder than breath. But it was a necessary one. They lean forward, feeding a small log to the flame. Sparks rise like startled birds. Not all monsters wear claws. Some wear patience, some wear smiles, polished and quiet. And not all prisons are cages. Some are mansions, some are marriages. The storyteller exhales, slow and long. She walked in willingly. That is how trust begins. But she did not stay. That is how truth survives. Their fingers rest now on the edge of the book. Not to open it, but to feel its weight. She turned the key, not because she was weak, but because she was brave. We are meant to ask, to look, even when it costs us something. A soft silence settles, like snow gathering in the corners of the room. But now, the storyteller murmurs, let us leave behind locked doors and blood on silk. Let us walk softly into a colder world, one lit only by the smallest light. They look toward the window. Let us speak of a child and a match, of hope that glows even as the world turns away, of hunger, yes, but also wonder. The fire crackles gently, and outside, snow begins to fall. It was the last night of the year. Snow drifted silently from a dark sky, landing in soft spirals on rooftops, coats, and cobblestone. The air was bitter, but the streets were lively, full of bundled bodies, chatter, flickering gaslight, and windows dressed in golden warmth. Behind glass, feasts were served, fireplaces blazed, candles glowed in wreaths, and music spilled out in faint fragments of celebration. But in the shadows, moving between laughter and lamplight, walked a little girl. She wore no hat, no gloves. Her coat, once wool and warm, had been patched so many times it resembled nothing at all. Her shoes were gone. One had been lost to a rushing carriage, the other taken by a boy who said he needed it more. Her feet were red with cold, pressed against the icy stones. She carried a small bundle in her apron, a handful of matches, tied together with a piece of string. Her father had sent her out with them at dusk. Don't come back until you've sold something, he'd said. And though his voice hadn't been cruel, it hadn't been kind either, not lately. She had not sold a single one. No one wanted matches on New Year's Eve. Not when candles were already lit, fires already stoked, homes already full. People passed her without looking, stepping around her as if she were a puddle or a shadow, and so she walked. Not quickly, not aimlessly, just forward, because forward was warmer than still. She came to a corner where two streets met. The wind curled around the stone like a curious ghost. A baker's shop stood nearby, and the scent of rising bread made her legs ache. She stood beneath its window for a long time, the tips of her toes just reaching the lowest ledge. Inside, a boy held a steaming bun in both hands, his face alight with joy. She pressed her hand to the glass. No one noticed. She stepped back, tucked herself into a narrow alcove between the baker's wall and the wooden post of a shuttered vendor's cart. The snow there was not so heavy, the stones a little less cruel. Her fingers shook as she reached into her apron and pulled out one match. She knew she shouldn't waste it, but the cold was biting at her fingertips now, numbing her legs. She struck it against the wall. It flared to life, and in its light, the world changed. She saw not the alley, not the street, but a fireplace wide and deep, with green-tiled sides and red bricks glowing like old embers. The heat of it washed over her, sweet and soft, wrapping around her limbs like her grandmother's shawl used to. She reached toward it, but just then the match went out. The fireplace disappeared. The wind returned. She blinked quickly, trying to hold on to the warmth in her memory. Her hands ached now, not just with cold, but with longing. She lit another. This time, the flame brought a room. A long table, white cloth draped like snowfall, silver dishes gleaming, a roast goose, golden and crackling, steam curling up like perfume, a bowl of buttered potatoes, apple tarts, candied almonds. There was laughter, too low and loving, like bells under a blanket. She took a step forward, but the match burned her fingers. She'll let go. Darkness again. Tears blurred her vision. She crouched lower, pressing her back to the wall, tucking her knees to her chest. People passed by. A woman with red gloves, a man humming a song she did not know, a boy dragging a sled behind him, the runners shrieking against the ice. None of them saw her. She struck another match. This one lit slower but steadier. And this time, she saw something else. Her grandmother. She stood at the end of a long hall, smiling, not young, but not as frail as the last time they'd met. Her face was full of light. Her arms were open. The little girl gasped, joy flooding her like sunrise. She reached out, but the match was fading. No, not this time. She lit another, and another. Her hands moved quickly now, striking match after match, until they burned together in a golden glow that made the alley disappear. All around her was light. No snow, no cold, only the vision of her grandmother, clearer now, closer. Her lips parted. "Come, child," and the little girl stood. She felt no pain, no weight, no hunger, only the warmth of a hand in hers. Morning came slowly, as though the sun itself were reluctant to rise on such a bitter day. The snowfall had eased to a delicate dusting, and the rooftops of the city glittered under a pale sky. Street lamps flickered out one by one, their glow giving way to the dull light of dawn. Shopkeepers began to stir behind shuttered windows. Dogs barked from narrow alleys. Bells chimed faintly from church towers, and in the corner between the baker's wall and the shuttered cart, a child sat frozen. Her eyes were closed. Her face, tilted slightly upward, held a strange peace. She looked as though she had fallen asleep while watching something beautiful, something too far away to name. In her lap lay the blackened remnants of matchsticks, dozens of them, burned to their ends, some still warm with soot. Her hands were curled gently around the final one, as though cradling a secret. No one noticed her at first. People walked past. Some glanced, a few frowned, but they did not stop. Not until the baker came to open his shop and dropped his basket in shock. Within the hour, a small crowd had gathered. The constable was called. Children pointed. A priest crossed himself and murmured prayers. No one spoke loudly. There was a strange quiet hanging in the cold air, as though the city itself felt ashamed. She froze. Someone said softly, "Why didn't anyone help her?" asked another. "She should not have been out in this weather," muttered a woman with fur-lined sleeves. But then the match girl did not answer. She had already left the place where such questions mattered. No one saw what she had seen. They did not see the fire she had conjured, nor the roast goose, nor the long white table. They did not see the grandmother who held out her arms. They did not see the way her bare feet had stepped forward into the light, nor the way her face had changed when she found herself no longer cold. They saw only what the world always sees, what remains behind. The shell, the stillness, the matchsticks. Later, in the small, quiet chapel on the edge of the district, she was buried without ceremony. A single bell tolled. No name marked the grave. The city did not keep records for children with nothing. But the priest who stood at the head of the plot bowed his head for longer than usual, and his hands trembled when he offered the blessing. In his sermon the next day, he spoke of light. He said nothing of fire or frost, only of a girl who had gone quietly and taken a piece of heaven with her. Years passed. The corner where she died was paved over, the bakery sold, the shuttered cart replaced with iron lamplight. But still, on the coldest nights of winter, when snow drifts past, the stones and candles flicker behind glass, no one knows who places a small bundle of matchsticks at the base of that lamppost, wrapped in linen, tied with string, and just once a child who passed by in the early dark said she saw a girl there, smiling. She held a match in her hand, but it was never lit. She didn't need to, she already carried the light. The fire has burned low, not out, but low. The storyteller sits without speaking, gazing into the quiet hearth, where the last pieces of wood glow like fallen stars. Their hands are folded. Their eyes reflect orange and gold, but behind them is something dimmer. Grief, perhaps, or memory. She was only a child. They say, at last, the words as soft as wool, and yet she carried more light than the whole world around her could see. Their voice is calm, but it moves like a tide beneath still water matches, a handful of tiny flames, and in them she found wonder, warmth. Her grandmother, she asked for nothing, and gave us everything. They do not speak of shame. They do not accuse. They simply let the silence stretch. Then there are stories that end in fire and stories that begin with it. Hers was both, a flame lit in sorrow, a soul carried in light. The storyteller reaches for the book and touches its edge. This next story is quieter still. No hunger, no matches, only a sleep so deep the world forgets to wake up. A sleep wrapped in thorn and spell. A girl lost in time itself, waiting ... not for rescue, but for return. They look toward the darkened window. Let us go there now, gently. Let us walk where vines wrap towers and brambles. Remember, where a kiss is not a conquest, but a promise made by time itself. The fire sighs once more, and the last dream begins. Once, in a kingdom that sat quiet as a breath between mountains and sky, a queen wept. She wept not for sorrow, but for longing. Day after day, she sat by the window and looked out at the gardens, where flowers bloomed and bees wove golden paths through sunlight, and she whispered into the wind, "If only I had a child." And the wind, being older than kings and kinder than some gods, heard her. Not long after, in the hush of winter's edge, a child was born, a girl with hair like evening wheat and eyes like deep water. The king and queen rejoiced. The bells of the kingdom rang for 3 days. Flowers were brought from every village. Doves flew in wide spirals across the sky, and the people sang in the streets. They named her a name that meant Golden One. Dawnlit, cherished. She was the only child, and she was loved. To mark the birth, the king and queen held a grand feast. They invited friends and nobles, musicians and poets, and most importantly, the wise women, the old ones, the gifted, the guardians of unseen things. There were 13 in the kingdom, but the king had only 12 golden plates fit to honor them, and so on, the 13th, was left uninvited. 12 arrived in silken shadow, their eyes heavy with knowing, their fingers curled with quiet grace. Each gave the child a gift. One gave beauty, another grace, another a voice that would calm beasts and kings alike, another wisdom, then kindness, then strength. One gave the gift of dancing feet, another healing hands, still another A heart that would never close itself to love. 11 had spoken. Then came the 12th. But before she could raise her voice, the hall doors burst open. The 13th had come. She walked in, not with rage but with silence. Her robes were not velvet, but tattered twilight. Her eyes gleamed with old grief. She did not bow. She did not ask forgiveness. She only stepped forward, and her words rang across the hall like ice breaking. The princess shall, on her 15th birthday, prick her finger on a spindle and die. Gasps erupted. The queen clutched tighter. The king rose in fury, but the 13th woman turned and left without another word. Then the 12th stepped forward, her voice calm, eyes sad. "I cannot undo the curse," she said, "but I can soften its edge." And so she whispered her gift. She shall not die, but sleep for 100 years, until awakened by a prince's heart, unafraid, the king, in fear, ordered every spinning wheel in the kingdom destroyed. Spindles were burned, weavers exiled, rooms sealed, towers locked. No thread was spun in the land again. Grew in light. She was everything the wise women had promised. Curious and gentle, her laugh a bell in the stone halls. She loved stories. She asked questions the scholars could not answer. Her presence softened those around her. The very trees seemed to turn toward her as she passed. But always there was a hush around her birthday. And the years passed. The day before her 15th year dawned. The castle was quieter than usual. The king and queen watched her too closely. The guards grew more tense. Servants whispered, but noticed none of it. She felt strange that morning. Restless, she walked the halls alone, and for the first time came upon a stair she did not remember. It spiraled upward, tight and thin, into a tower forgotten by time. The door was narrow. The air smelled of dust and cobwebs. But beyond the door, she heard something. A humming, soft, patient. She climbed. At the top sat a woman old, bent, with fingers stained by time. She worked at a strange tool had never seen before. A spinning wheel. "Hello," said the girl. "Curious. What are you doing?" The woman looked up, smiled. "I'm spinning. Would you like to try?" Approached. The spindle turned. She reached out, and the curse unfolded. She pricked her finger, and the blood, just one drop, fell to the floor like a seed. And she slept, not a swoon, not a faint, but a perfect, unshakable, endless sleep. The curse moved through the castle like wind. The king, mid-step, closed his eyes and crumpled. The queen, weeping, sank into her throne and dreamed. Guards froze in place. Servants slumped. Fireplaces dimmed. Bells stopped ringing. The birds in the rafters stilled. Even the dogs curled into silence. And all around the castle, briars grew. Vines thickened, thorns lengthened, leaves darkened. They wrapped towers and windows, gates and stone. They bloomed once deep red, then sealed the castle like a wound. And the world forgot. For many years, people spoke of the sleeping princess. Some came to find her. Princes, knights, thieves, poets. Some reached the briars. None passed through. Some never returned at all. And the castle dreamed on. The castle slept. Time did not stop it, only bent. Years passed, but the hallways within remained still. Dust settled like whispered lullabies on every surface. The air grew cool, quiet, and thick with memory. Cobwebs hung like soft banners from paintings of kings and queens stared out into an eternal hush. Food lay untouched on platters, frozen in the moment of abandonment. A violin rested mid-note in a music chamber. Bow, leaning against a chair that would never be moved again, lay in her tower chamber. her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the world's forgotten breath. She did not age. Her golden hair spread across the pillows like rays trapped beneath snow. Her hands rested gently over her heart. She did not dream, but her stillness seemed to hum with waiting. Below, the briars thickened. They grew slowly at first, then with wild, furious purpose. Their roots cracked stone. Their vines clawed at sky and chimney. Thorns thickened into spears. Roses bloomed once a year, reached red as blood, then fell before dawn. And the outside world changed. The kingdom that had once flourished fell to war. A greedy cousin took the throne and lost it within 10 winters. Names were rewritten, borders redrawn. Forests grew where farms had been. Villages rose and crumbled like breath on glass. The castle became legend, then myth. They say a sleeping girl lies behind the thorns, murmured one shepherd boy to another many decades later. Cursed or holy? I heard she's a demon, said the other. The vines guard her soul, but no one saw her. No one passed the thorns. Some tried, many died. Those who returned came back broken, scratched, and half-blind, their minds filled with thorns that never healed. And still she slept. In the 78th year of her slumber, a woman came. She was not a knight or a prince. She was a healer, grey-haired and soft-eyed, her hands wrapped in linen. She stood at the edge of the briars, whispered a prayer, and pressed her palm to the thorns. The vines opened, not wide, not in welcome, but just enough to let her in. She walked the empty halls, gathering herbs from windowsills, dusting old books, leaving sprigs of lavender on the queen's still lap. When she reached the princess's chamber, she paused, then bowed. "You are remembered," she whispered, and then she left. The thorns closed behind her. A century passed. On the morning of the 100th year, the air shifted, not with magic but with something simpler. Readiness. The forest stirred. The wind leaned toward the castle. The roses began to bloom and did not die at dawn. Unfar away, in a distant village, a boy named Rohan was waking. He was not a prince. Not truly. His bloodline was noble, somewhere long ago. But now he lived simply sharpening blades, tending horses, listening more than speaking. His mother had called him a dreamer. His father, long buried, had called him more heart than shield. He was kind, but not soft, quiet, but not dull, and he had always dreamed strange things. That morning, he woke with a name on his tongue. He didn't know who she was, but the sound of it filled him with something he could not name, grief and yearning, and something like a memory that hadn't happened yet. By nightfall, he left the village. He walked without question, as if some part of him already knew the path. Through forest, over frost, across stone bridges worn by time, and on the 3rd day, he found the wall of briars. They did not attack. They did not open. They simply shifted. Just enough. He stepped through, and the vines closed behind him. The castle welcomed him with silence. Not warmth, not dread, just a stillness so complete it hummed, as if the walls had not felt breath in 100 winters and now held theirs in return. Rohan stepped lightly through the courtyard, his boots crunching leaves that should not have been there, browned and dry, yet never scattered by wind. Ivy clung to statues with gentle fingers. Birds perched in stone windowsills, unmoving, their wings caught mid-tuck, their beaks slightly parted, frozen in the middle of forgotten songs. He passed beneath great arches and through halls that echoed not with sound but memory. He paused once to lift a velvet drape and saw beneath it a feast laid out in eternal waiting. Goblets still filled, bread untouched, fruit as bright as the day it had been sliced. Servants lined the walls, asleep on their feet. One still held a pitcher mid-pour. It did not frighten him, he only nodded. This was not death. This was not curse. This was a breath held for 100 years, and someone somewhere was still holding it. He passed through corridors dusted in silence, through chambers where musicians clutched their violins in slumber, where books lay open to pages fluttering gently in windless air. At last, he reached the tower. A stair spiraled upward, cloaked in shadow and old ivy. He climbed it slowly, one hand on the rail, the other tracing the wall. The door at the top was cracked open. He pushed it gently, and there she was, lay just as the stories had said, bathed in a soft, golden light that seemed to come from nowhere. Her gown shimmered with age-woven threads, delicate as spider silk. Her hair a golden river across the pillows. Her face was calm to calm, as if time itself had been pressed into her skin and left no weight behind. Rowan stood at the threshold. He did not rush to her. He did not speak. He simply breathed, and with each breath, something old began to stir. The air shifted. The hush wavered. He stepped forward, slowly, until he stood beside her bed. He knelt and watched her. It was not the tale he had imagined. He had not expected stillness to feel so sacred. He did not know her, but something deep in him did. A recognition that passed beyond words, one soul-brushing, another in the dusk between lifetimes. Her hand was resting lightly upon the coverlet, fingers curled as if gently holding the last note of a song. He touched her fingertips with his own, and then, without ceremony, he leaned forward and placed a kiss light as breath upon her forehead. Not possession, not claim, but promise. The world exhaled. It was not sudden, not the jolt of awakening, but a soft release. The air grew warmer. Dust lifted from the stone like morning mist. The candelabras flickered. Outside, the roses bloomed in waves, petal after petal, vine after vine. In the tower, stirred. She blinked once. Then again, and the breath she drew was not sharp, but steady. Her eyes opened, and for the first time in a century, she looked at the world. At him, Rohan met her gaze. He did not speak, but she smiled slow, uncertain, and whispered, "I know you." In the great hall, servants yawned and rubbed their eyes. The king, still gripping the railing, gasped in shock, then looked around in confusion. The queen wept openly, reaching for her daughter's name, even before she knew why. Chimes sounded in distant bell towers. The vines fell away from the castle like water dissolving into air. Birds lifted into flight. The kingdom, forgotten by time, woke as one. Rose slowly. The stiffness of her limbs did not linger. The curse had preserved her not just in body, but in soul. As she stepped through the castle's corridors once more, those who saw her dropped to their knees, not from command, but reverence. She was not just their princess, she was their return. She was memory remade. She stood in the courtyard, with Rowan beside her, the sun rising over the stones, and for the first time in 100 years, morning felt new. The castle did not rejoice. It exhaled, as if after a long-held breath. The stones had softened, the arches straightened, the air lightened. There was no fanfare, no parades, only soft footsteps, returning to old patterns and the slow turning of clocks that had not ticked in 100 years. The servants, confused but comforted, resumed their tasks. The king and queen, dazed but whole, clung to each other and watched their daughter move like light through the halls, unsure if they were awake or still inside a dream. And she did not speak often at first. She wandered, not lost, but listening, as though time still whispered to her through the stones and flowers. She touched walls that had watched generations fall. She leaned from windows that had not opened since kings with different names had ruled. She knelt in the rose garden where the thorns had once grown tall as trees, now withered into soft green stems, and pressed her hand to the earth, and she remembered, not what had happened while she slept, but what the sleep itself had taught her. Rohan stayed in the castle, not as a prince, but as himself. He asked for no titles, no lands, no reward. He walked beside her in silence, listened when she spoke only when the quiet asked to be shared. He did not claim her, he remained, not because he wished to be written into her story, but because she was already part of his. Their days unfolded gently, like pages turned by wind. She showed him the tower first, then the old library, where vines had once climbed across poetry, then the lake, which had frozen during her century of sleep, and still held the chill of waiting in its water, and each night she dreamed not of thorns or curses, but of the way the stars looked different now, not because they had changed, but because she had. In time, the kingdom remembered itself. Other realms sent letters of stunned congratulations. Maps were redrawn, names spoken again, but for the future moved slowly. She did not wish to be a queen, not yet. She did not wish to be anything but present. And so the court accepted her stillness. They celebrated her survival, but did not rush her voice. And Rohan always near became the rhythm beside her breath. When they married, it was not a grand affair. The ceremony took place in the castle's courtyard, beneath the rose arch, where the last thorns had bloomed and fallen. No trumpets, no procession, only candlelight, and a quiet promise, made not before the world, but before time itself, that they would not break what had been healed, that they would move forward gently, and wake each day together. They ruled in time, not as rulers of conquest or decree, but as caretakers of memory. They opened the gates, let the people walk the gardens once hidden behind vine and fear. They restored the tower not as a prison, but as a sanctuary. And every year, on the day the princess had pricked her finger on the spindle, a single red rose was laid on the tower steps. No speeches, only silence, grateful silence. It is said never truly stopped listening to the air. Even in old age, she would pause and close her eyes, as if the wind carried a voice only she could hear, the voice of the spell, or perhaps the voice of time itself. And it is said that when she died peacefully, long after Rohan the castle did not sleep again, it simply paused, as if nodding in thanks, and then let the world move on. But somewhere in the deep forest, where the light filters gold through leaves, a single thorn vine still grows. Not sharp, not cruel, just one. It blooms every spring with a single blood-red rose, and beneath it lies a spindle, broken long ago, wrapped in roots, waiting, not for a curse, but for the story to be told again. The storyteller closes the book, not with a thud, but a hush, as if even the air must respect the weight of dreams fulfilled. The fire is nearly ash now, pulsing soft red like a heartbeat falling into sleep. Shadows stretch long along the walls. Outside, the stars are higher, and the wind has gone quiet, carrying the last words away like fireflies through the night. And you've stayed to the very end. Thank you, truly. You've walked with dancing princesses through hidden silver forests. You've knelt with a sister beside nettles and silence. You've stood at the door no one was meant to open. You've held a match in the cold, just long enough to see something more. And at last, you've paused beside a sleeping girl and remembered how time waits for no one and for everyone. If you felt something in these stories, if a line lingered in your chest, or an image stayed with you longer than you expected, if you dream a little differently now than you did before, then let that be the light you carry forward. And if you haven't already, go ahead and like the video. gently, as if turning the last page of your favorite book. Comment below and tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Not just on the clock, but in your life, in your mood, in your heart. And if you'd like to keep dreaming with me, I invite you to check out my next video. It is waiting for you just beyond the next story, ready to carry you somewhere new. Until then, the hearth grows still. The book is closed, but you are always welcome to return. Good night, and dream well.